Let's pray before we get started. Heavenly Father, thank you for your word. Thank you even for the parts of your word that are more difficult to preach through. Because it's all here for a reason, and we don't want to miss any of it. So Lord, we just thank you for the completeness of what you gave us and the sufficiency of what you gave us. We pray that our hearts would be open to the truth that you want us to receive from it. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Have you ever felt like you didn't belong somewhere?
Wow, that's a starter.
Or maybe felt like you didn't deserve to be somewhere or with someone. Or maybe just awkward. You didn't know what to say or how to act or whatever. I run into Australians all the time who feel that way about church. A phrase that goes something like this. Okay, so you can tell me how awful this is later. Something like, yeah, no, if I walked into a church, it just burned down. Something like that. How bad was that? Was that pretty bad?
Awful.
Was that okay? That was getting better?
More South African.
More South African, okay. Well, I tried. But you've heard what I'm talking about, haven't you? You've heard something to that effect, that if I walked into a church, the place would burn to the ground. I'm kind of said with a little bit of a pride thing. You know. What do people mean when they say that? They mean that's not really my kind of place. I wouldn't feel comfortable. Maybe the hardest, maybe this is true and it shouldn't be. Yeah, you don't want people like me there anyway. So maybe that's what they actually feel. And the way that comes out is if I walked in that place, it would burn down. That's not where I feel comfortable. It's hard. This might be you. There's been people before. About a year and a half ago, there was a guy, and he was famous for saying this sort of thing. So famous that even though I'm not from the local area, I knew he'd said things like this. And then he walked into the church, and I think half the church went, oh, he walked in. That happens. So this could be you. And if it isn't you, it is someone you know. There's somebody you know that feels this way about church. And I'm not asking you to picture it to mock them or to judge them. I'm asking you to picture this person right now. So picture somebody you know that's the way they feel about church. I just want you to acknowledge them. Acknowledge that this is the way they feel. This is who they are. This is the barrier they have between them and being here. It's hard for them. It's difficult. Today's story is about a person like that. Today's story is about a person to whom they were definitely not the in people. They were an out person. Approaching Jesus would have been very hard for this person. Approaching Judaism, that is a thing back then, would have been hard for this person. So I want us to understand as we go in who it is we're going to be talking about, because this is really important. The next thing that we need to realize before we read this passage is what this story is placed next to. So, we read this in chunks on Sunday mornings because I can't preach the entire Bible in one shot. It's just not possible. And so we read little bits, but those little bits were meant to be read together in as a book. So what happened right before this is really important. And what happened right before this, if you were here this week, you know that Jesus had some extremely hard work for a group of people called the Pharisees. We're in Mark chapter 7, if you're trying to find it. Pharisees is a fancy word for some people who were super religious, super spiritual-ish. If there was an in crowd, they are the most in of the in. They were mega in. They were super in. They were so in that they had kind of taken over. This is their club where they made the rules and they decided that they were in charge. It was going to be the way they wanted. That's the way they felt about church. And Jesus had some extremely harsh words for them. Essentially, it's not your church, it's not your building, and it's not your rules, it's mine, and you're ruining my church, essentially is what he had to say to them. And so in context, that is just, Mark just talked about that. He just said, here's some in people Jesus was really upset with. And now I'm going to show you a really out person, and they're going to get what they're looking for. That's the contrast that the story is intentionally trying to show. It's intentionally trying to show us the difference between that it really isn't that valuable to be in, and that Jesus might accept you just fine if you're out. That's the contrast that's trying to be set up here. So we need to understand that as we come in. So with that in mind, let's see if we can't get into this. We're in chapter 7 of Mark. We're going to start in verse 24. I'm reading from the New International Version this week. And if you need a Bible, we have a stack of them. Or there's some up on the shelf. And if you need one to take home, please feel free. We're going to start in verse 24. This is the way it starts. I'm actually going to do this one verse at a time this time. We're just going to unfold this gradually. Verse 24. From there he, this is Jesus, arose and went to the region of Tyre and Sidon. And he entered a house and wanted no one to know it, but he could not be hidden. Okay, so what's going on here? Jesus is traveling, and most of you don't know anything about Old Testament or New Testament geography, but Jesus belonged to Judah as a country, and then he grew up in Galilee, but this area is kind of on the edge of Jewish civilization. There would have been some Jewish people that lived there, but there would have been some people who lived there that were not Jewish. You wouldn't have exactly called it Jewish territory, but there were a lot of Jewish people who lived in the town. It was kind of on the edge of where Jewish people lived. And Jesus is there. Okay, got it. And he's famous. That's the next thing you need to get here. He can't walk into a house without everyone going, look where Jesus went! Ah! And run around and be really excited and want to know where Jesus went, because everyone knows who this Jesus guy is, because he's been healing people and doing amazing things and like walking on water. That's pretty bizarre. And everyone's interested in this Jesus guy. He can't go anywhere without attention. That's what we get out of the first verse. Next verse, verse 25. A woman whose young daughter had an unclean spirit heard about him, and she came and fell at his feet. So this is a mom. This is a mom who has a little girl, and this girl has a spiritual problem that's wrecking her life. The moms in this room, I think you could probably put yourself into her position pretty easily if you had a daughter who was sick, who had maybe convulsions or bizarre visions, and she was uncontrollable and she was sick and you were scared to death. And you're worried about your daughter and you can't find a solution. You can't fix it. You've tried everything. You've tried and you've tried and you've tried and you don't know what to do. And now this Jesus guy, and he's famous. He's famous for dealing with this kind of stuff. He's famous for fixing these kinds of things that nobody else can fix. And so you've come to Jesus and you just fallen on the floor and you're begging Jesus, would you fix my little girl? This isn't a new scene. This sort of thing has happened before in Mark. This isn't the first time that someone's come to Jesus desperate for a solution to a big problem that they can't fix. That's not new. It's happened before. But we can feel for this mom, right? We can feel for this mom who has a child that's broken in a way that she has no idea what to do. And then our story gets really weird in verse 26. Verse 26. The woman was a Greek, okay, a Syrophoenician by birth, and she kept asking him to cast the demon out of her daughter. Okay, I can see the gears clicking in your heads. What in the world is a Syrophoenician or a Styrofoamian or whatever it is that she is? It's the first thing I think when I see that word, styrofoam. I don't know what. Is that even an Australian word, styrofoam? You guys say something else. Anyway, the Styrofoamian woman. What does it mean? Well, why does it matter? Who cares? Well, actually, it matters a lot. It's very, very interesting that Mark picks this word. There are other words he could have picked or other things he could have said. He simply could have said a Gentile woman. A Gentile woman would have been just someone who wasn't Jewish. Or he could have said a Greek woman. Or even more interestingly, there's a word they could have used called God-fearer. What is a God-fearer? A God-fearer was someone who wasn't Jewish, but they got it. This was the true God, and I've got it that this is the true God, and I've recognized that this is the true God, but I haven't done all the ceremonies to become Jewish. So the Jews don't think I'm Jewish, but I think their God is the real God. Yeah, there's a word for that called God-fearer. We see that word a lot in the book of Acts. And actually, when the first people started becoming Christians outside of Jews, so Jesus was the Jewish Messiah for the Jewish people, he'd been prophesied by Jewish prophets, and then when that was done, he said, oh, look, you're going to take my message first to Judea, then Samaria, and then to the rest of the world. Jesus made it clear, my good news is for everybody, not just Jewish people. But we're going to start with the Jewish people, we're going to work out. And the first people, outside of the Jewish people, that started getting this message and coming to Jesus were these God-fearing people. They weren't Jewish, but they recognized that the Jewish God was God. He doesn't use that word. I have to assume he doesn't use that word because that's not who she is. There's a word for that. He was very specific. He could have chosen a different specific word. He chose the word that best described who she was. She was best described as a Syrophoenician. What does that even mean? It means that she was Syrian. And the Jews knew very well what the Syrians were like. The Syrians had taken over their country 500 years ago, taken them as slaves, and had idols to all kinds of gods. And they did not honor God. They had idols in their houses. The best explanation of who this woman is that she's an idol-worshipping person from a race that had despised and killed Jews. That's who she is. It's important that we understand that that's who she is, because otherwise we might imagine whatever else. So she's a mother who's desperate, who wants her daughter saved, but she's not from a culture who's ever considered that God is God. There's 20 gods, and they're in my house, and I have a little family altar, and we worship them, and we do not believe in the Jewish God, and I would not believe in all that stuff. That's not what I believe in. I don't believe that. That would have been true of her until she was desperate. Until hers didn't work. Until what she believed in was falling apart and wasn't sufficient to meet the need in her life.
Amen.
But that's who she is. This woman would have been very uncomfortable in a Jewish synagogue. She would have been uncomfortable at the Jewish temple. She would have been uncomfortable talking to a Jew. She was as out as you can be out. This was not her culture. These were not her people. This is not who she would be comfortable with. These were their ex-slaves. These were Jewish people. Not her kind. Not her people, not her stuff, not her environment, not what she was comfortable with. She was out. Can you imagine the risk she was taking? I wonder what her friends and neighbors think of her going to this Jewish prophet. You don't believe what those Jewish people believe, do you? You're not switching sides, are you? You're not giving up on what we think, are you? Jesus is the type of person who would say, if I ever set foot in the synagogue, the building would probably burn down. But she is going to receive a spiritual victory that those super spiritual in people never would. Look also at the fact that she kept asking. What does that mean? Isn't that what it says? Verse 26, and she kept asking him to cast the demon out of her daughter. What does that mean? He didn't do it the first time. That's never happened before in Mark. Up till now, people have been, would you heal? Yep. Pow. Would you take care of? Yep. Pow. She asked and she didn't get a yes right away. Otherwise, it wouldn't say kept asking. It would have said she asked once. She kept asking. She's asked and she didn't get a positive answer. But she's desperate, so she keeps on it. And she keeps on it. And she's asking. And she's asking. And she won't let go of it. And then Jesus responds in verse 27. And it's hard language to our ears, but you need to hold on. Just hang in there. But Jesus said to her, let the children be filled first, for it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs. Whoa! Okay, before you run out of the church screaming, some of you may have some phrases and language that you use with your culture that I would find difficult to hear. Okay? You need to listen all the way through this before we make it. What is Jesus saying in what he just said? Here's what he said. Translated. I came here to proclaim to the Jewish people who live here that the hero that they were promised has arrived. And that's why I'm here. You don't even believe that my Father is God. I'm not here for you right now. That's not why I came to this town. That's a hard thing to hear from Jesus. It's hard to hear. Now here's some things that I'm thinking. I'm not putting these in Jesus' head. I'm telling you these are things I think when I read this. Lady, you have false gods in your house. You worship demons. You pray to a deceiver in the hopes of getting things you want. And now you're desperate because your daughter is reaping the consequences of your bad choices. Do you not understand this is your fault? See, I'm not putting this in Jesus' head. I'm putting this in my head. And I'm also telling you, I am so glad this is not how Jesus reacts, because that thought is so wrong. That is a wrong thought. If you were right there with me, if you ever felt, come on man, you did this to yourself, why would God help you? Then we are wrong together. You can join me in being wrong. You see, that's our problem. Our problem is we don't understand that all of us face the consequences of all of our sin. And yet somehow, as the in crowd, we get into church and we start feeling self-righteous. We start feeling like somehow I deserve what I've got. And then when you make mistakes in your life and you reap the natural consequences of your mistakes, I feel like I can be judgmental. Not remembering that I'm in the same boat you're in. I don't deserve what I have. I don't deserve heaven. I don't deserve grace. I don't deserve the Holy Spirit in my life. I don't deserve any of that anyway, any more than anyone else does. So when I look down on other people and I say, no, you caused your own problem. I am arrogantly forgetting my own personal state. How badly I need grace. And so I'm wrong. Now, Jesus, having never sinned, would have a right to feel that way. And yet, he doesn't. I, who have no right to feel that way, have a tendency to do that. Jesus' answer is hard. Jesus' answer explains why she has had to ask more than once. But her response in verse 28 blows me away. The humility of this woman's answer is crazy. This is what she says in verse 28. And she answered and said to him, "Yes, Lord, yet even the little dogs under the table eat from the children's crumbs." Hold on. I cried when I wrote that. I'm going to keep it. Jesus made a hard answer and said, "Woman, you don't even believe in what we believe. You're not even there. You don't believe it." And she said, "I get it. I don't understand. I get it that I'm outside. I get it that I'm the little dog and that you've come for your children. Would you still give me a crumb? Because my daughter is sick and she's dying and she's a mess and I don't have a solution and I don't know what to do. Would you still give me something?" You're right. I don't understand. You're right. I'm not worthy. If you were here last week, do you see the contrast between this woman and the super religious people of last week? They were so arrogant, complaining that Jesus' followers didn't follow one of their extra little traditions that they had made up. While this little woman is willing to call herself a little dog. Why? Well, whatever it takes to save her daughter, that's why. And then in verses 29 and 30, we get Jesus' response to her need. Jesus says this to her, "For this saying, go your way, the demon has gone out of your daughter." When she had come to her house, she found the demon had gone out and her daughter was laying on the bed. Jesus regarded her request and he answers her need. And by this point in the book of Mark, it's no big news that Jesus can deliver people. That's not big news anymore. He's done it over and over and over and over. The big news is that he did. For her. This outsider, who up until this very moment had possibly never even acknowledged the true God in her entire life. So what is the key? What did this woman, why did she get what she wanted, but the super spiritual club only got yelled at? What's the difference between the two? And we need to grab this difference, because whatever it is, it's important. Let's look first at some things that are not on the list of what this woman did or did not do. Number one, she was definitely not one of the in people. The in people last week were yelled at. The out person got what she asked for. You do not have to be comfortable with church, feel like you belong in church, or even like church, for you to meet Jesus and for Jesus to meet the need that you have in your life. Now, I believe that if you meet Jesus and he starts to work in your life, that he'll draw you together with his people. We need church because we need each other. Not because we need this building or the traditions or musical instruments per se, but as a group, as a team, we need each other to succeed. We need each other's encouragement and love and prayers and support and all the different pieces that we all bring. We do need each other. But we don't need church to meet Jesus.
That's right.
Number two, she did not know all the rules. She wasn't an expert on the Bible, and she had no clue what any of the ceremonies were supposed to be like or any of that stuff at all. And she still got what she wanted from Jesus. You know what else? She wasn't living any kind of perfect life. She hadn't changed yet. There's no evidence at all that this woman did anything. She didn't start coming to church first. Jesus didn't say, give me some money first, or throw away your idols first, or promise that you'll join the church. He didn't say, promise that you'll go home and throw away the idols. He didn't say any of that stuff. Interesting. It was a gift. It was grace. Those weren't the things that mattered when it came to meeting Jesus and Jesus meeting her need. Here are the things that were there. We can see it very clearly. Number one, there was a desperation. The in crowd felt self-sufficient. The out person was desperate. Sadly, and this is just the truth, few people come to Jesus without feeling desperate first. It's just the way it is. I think this is one of the reasons that Jesus said it was so hard for rich people to enter the kingdom of heaven. Rich people are less desperate. They can always rely on their money. It's just easier to avoid that feeling of desperate. If I've got $1 million in the bank. If you're in this room and you haven't really committed to God, I suspect that maybe you simply haven't felt a desperate need for God yet. When we're praying for the outsiders that we know in our life, those people that I said, let's think about them, we need to be praying that the Holy Spirit would make them desperate for God. Because really, if they don't feel desperate for God, then they will never get to where they meet God. That sense of, my life is a wreck, and there's something spiritual and deep, and I can't fix it, and I'm done now. I am simply done trying to fix it myself. I need God to fix it. That's where people have to get before they meet Jesus. That's a requirement. I know that this woman had a spiritual problem, and that spiritual problem needed a spiritual answer. And no amount of money or power or food or friends was ever going to make any difference. She had come to the point where she realized she needed something else. And that all the other stuff in her life was never going to be enough to fix the problem that she had. That's important. Number two, humility. Humility. People from last week, the spiritual in crowd, the super spiritual, they were so proud that they went around telling other people extra rules and laws and stuff that they should have to do to be as good as they were. This woman approaches Jesus and says, if this is what's necessary, consider me a little dog under the table. Would you please just give me a crumb? James 4:6 says this, God is opposed to the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. It's hard, I know, but God only allows one God.
Yeah.
One. You don't get to be God also. One. And so long as we're living as if we're God too, as if I get to decide too, as if I'm just as important as he is, then there's two. And God isn't allowed two, God allows one. There's no other way to approach God that works except humility in recognizing you're God and I am not God, and I give in and I give up and I kneel to you, you're God. There's no other way to approach it. The last thing she had was faith. What does faith mean? That's a pretty churchy word, faith. Here's what it is. She clearly believed Jesus could do what she needed. If she didn't do that, if she didn't have that faith, she wouldn't have kept fighting for so long. She would have left. She wouldn't leave. She kept asking. She kept asking because she was convinced. She believed. See, her knowledge was Her obedience was negative, but her faith was certain. Her faith was certain. She absolutely believed Jesus could do what she needed Jesus to do. This is important. This is so important. It is more important by far than whether you understand everything perfectly or whether your life looks perfect. Those things are but you've got to have faith that Jesus can do what Jesus said he can do. That is not negotiable. She had that. She believed. Verse 26 says she kept asking. She wasn't going to leave. She was certain that Jesus could heal her daughter. Are you certain that Jesus is who he said he is? Are you certain that he can do what he says he can do? When we pray for others, are we praying that they would have a conviction of the certainty of who Jesus is? Because if they don't, that's a barrier. That's a tough. They've got to, at some point, the Holy Spirit has to work in their life where they actually become certain that Jesus is who he said he was. We need to be praying that for the people in our lives. And according to Romans 8:2, 8, and 9, that certainty, even that certainty, that's a gift. So we need to be praying that they would be given that certainty. One last challenge before we close. There are people in this room that have always been in. What do I mean by that? I have always been in socially, like the church thing. It'd be difficult to find someone on the planet that was born more in than me. I have grandparents that were pastors. I have 2 uncles that are pastors. My parents were missionaries. I have cousins who are missionaries. My dad had a Bible degree and was working at a missionary society when I was born. My mother has a master's of divinities and was a professional speaker for Christian events. I feel more comfortable in a church by far than a bar. When I think about going to a bar, I feel like if I went in there, the place would burn down. Not my world, not my thing. Some of you in this room are in too. My kids would be culturally in. They've known nothing else their whole life except church. I just want you to know something very, very important. That does not mean you have met Jesus.
That's right.
Doesn't mean you met Jesus. It might mean that you feel really comfortable. It might mean that you feel good here or easy here or that you like it here. It might mean that you know your Bible really good. It might mean that you know the rules and the patterns of what happens and you can predict how the service goes, but it doesn't mean you ever met Jesus. The meeting Jesus part is that, what we just talked about? What was that? Desperation, humility, faith. Don't depend on the fact that you were born to a Christian family, grew up in a Christian home, that this is an easy place for you to be, that you get it, that this is church, that you kind of like it here. That has nothing to do with whether you're going to heaven or whether you've met Jesus or whether Jesus has done anything powerful in your life. Only those other things matter. Don't bank your life, your future, your spiritual safety on the fact that you feel like you're in. Because that's not what this is about. I'm going to close with just a prayer for all of us. I think it's a prayer we can all pray. I'm going to pray about those 3 things. So let's do that right now. Heavenly Father, Lord, whatever spiritual place we're in this room, whether we would feel very out, like, wow, this is a big deal for me to be in this room right now, or whether we feel very in, like this is the most natural place to sit in the whole world. or wherever that is that we are at in the continuum of feeling socially, whatever. I pray, Lord, that you do three things in our heart right now. Lord, would you make us desperate for you? Would you dial down our self-sufficiency? Would you help us realize that we have spiritual problems that need a spiritual solution? And no matter money or effort or doing good or good friends or a good job or a nice house will fix the horrible spiritual problem that we have. Would you make us desperate for you? Either desperate for the first time or desperate for the 100th time. It doesn't matter. Would you bring us into a place where we are so desperate for your power, your grace, your solution, who you are in our lives. Or we could never have enough of that. Lord, could you make us thankful, this is hard, would you make us thankful for the events in our lives that make us desperate for you? Because that's good for us. Because it makes us spiritually healthy when we have to return and recall and remember that we need you so badly. Lord, would you humble us? Would you take our confidence out of the stuff that we do, or whether we know our Bible really well, or whatever it is that we have our pride in, would you squish it? Would you cause us to remember that there is one God only, it is you, and we are not God. Would you cause us to bend our will and to place ourselves under your authority and to say, I get it. You're God, I am not God. And I submit to you. Lord, lastly, would you increase our faith? Would you help our unbelief? Would you give us an unswerving confidence in who Jesus is, that he is the real deal. He is who he says he is, however we want to say it, and he can do what he says he can do. He is God, and he can fix it. He can fix us with the Father. He can cleanse us of our sin. He can fix the mistakes. He can put it back together, and he can make us eternally brothers and sisters with him in heaven forever. He has the power to do all those things. Lord, would you cause us to believe it? To have true faith. A faith that would be consistent. A faith that would not leave. A faith that wouldn't leave the room or leave the feet of Jesus or quit asking until it got an answer. A stubborn faith. Would you give us that? Lord, every person in this room needs those three things far more than we need to be in, far more than we need to be religious or churchy. We need those things. From those things you will grow other things that are good and valuable and worthy. But it will start there, God. Would you make sure that we're there? In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.